Welcome to the Effortless English Show with the world's #1 English teacher, AJ Hoge, where AJ's more than 40 million students worldwide finally learn English once and for all, without the boring textbooks, classrooms, and grammar drills. Here's AJ with a quick piece to help you learn to speak fluent English effortlessly.
I'm AJ Hoge, author of Effortless English, Learn to Speak English Like a Native. Welcome. I highly recommend that you try my VIP program. You want to speak English fluently, you want to speak powerfully, you want to speak well, you want to speak confidently. You can try my VIP program just $1 for 10 days. $1. That's plenty of time to get a feeling for it. Go to effortlessenglishclub.com, effortlessenglishclub.com. Now, speaking of VIP program, I'm going to start the show today reading a comment on Gab from one of our VIP members, Carol. Many of you will know her name, Carol. She's French. And she has a fantastic comment today about her English success. I guess it's a success story. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it. I don't think she would mind if I read this. Here we go. Okay, this is from Carol. It's on Gab. This is on my Gab, and she sent this to me today. Hi, AJ. Hi, dear Effortless English friends. Today I woke up wondering what the day was holding for me. I knew I had to take an English test for my job later in the morning. Okay, she had to take an English test. One of those silly English tests with lots of weird words and academic jargon. Academic means like, school, university. Jargon, it's like specific vocabulary. It's kind of a vocabulary used only in one area of life. For example, school. Okay, so this is not just a speaking test she was taking, just like a normal average speaking test, just conversation. This is kind of much, more academic, more like, school, university type of test. It was a little stressful, I must admit, as the required result was pretty high. She had to obtain at least 970 points out of 990. So yeah, that would be stressful. She has to get there's a total of 990 possible points. She had to get at least 970. That's kind of high. But this is the part of the story I really love. It's amazing. Okay, Carol says, Carol's a VIP member. Well, to make a long story short, it turned out that the day had a very nice surprise in store for me. I scored 980 points. I only made 2 mistakes in 200 questions. But the best, this is my favorite part, but the best of it is I did even better than my British coworker. So she got a higher score than her British coworker. I'm assuming her British coworker is a native speaker. Although she didn't say that directly, but that's amazing. That's really fantastic. And then the next thing Carol writes, she writes, so if anyone is still doubting and wants proof that AJ's method works, here it is. It even works for English academic tests. Of course, it only works if you commit and don't quit. Keep going and practicing, guys. It's the only secret and the only key to success. So that's wonderful. I can share my screen so you guys can see it. And you can go to Gab. She put this on the Effortless English Gab group. So you can go read it yourself if you want. Go to gab.com and find the Effortless English group, and you can read that yourself. And if you have any nice comments for her, you can tell her congratulations. So that's amazing. And what I find amazing about that is that, as you know, as most of you know, we do not focus on academic English. Not at all in Effortless English. None of my courses focus on that. VIP does not focus on that. We're focused on what you might call more general conversational English, although in VIP especially, we are doing more advanced vocabulary, meaning less common. But still, we don't talk about tests. We don't worry about tests. We're not focused on tests. That's not our focus. Our focus is real world speaking ability, real world listening ability, real world conversational ability, communication ability. But here's the cool thing, that's what ultimately tests are trying to find, right? They're trying to find, is your English generally good? If it's a good test, it will test that, and you will still get a high score, even if you don't focus on the test. So a lot of people ask me, hey, how do I get a high Toefl score? Toefl score is another one of these academic type of English tests. And, a lot of people will say, study for the TOEFL, study books about TOEFL, try to learn all the tricks of the TOEFL test. But, my answer is just improve your English in general, right? Just read a lot, listen a lot, speak when you can. As your real world English level goes up, your TOEFL score will go up. It will, right? Instead of focusing just on the test only. And that's what too many people, they worry about these tests, TOEFL, TOEIC, IELTS, others, and they get too focused on these tests and they forget about real world English. So I recommend focus on real world English. That's what my VIP program trains you to do, teaches you, just like Carol did, and you will get higher test results eventually. Not immediately, but eventually you will. So, and then you'll also be, but here's the cool thing, you also will be able to speak, and you'll understand what people are saying to you, and you'll be able to read real books, not only focused on, these tests. All right, so anyway, I just wanted to start with that because it's very encouraging and a great, wonderful success story. Let's jump into our book club. We are continuing with our book. The book this time is called Life After Life, written by Raymond Moody. And this is a book about, in fact, life after death. is what, it meaning that, after this life, what happens? What happens when we die? And, a lot of people, there are all kinds of ideas and opinions and stories and teachings about this. But what's interesting about this book is only focused on the experiences of people who die, or we might say almost die, right? In other words, for example, their heart stops, their brain stops, right? Medically, this can be proven. And, they're in an emergency room, for example, and they die, right? The heart stops, the brain, no brain waves, everything stops. And then they're brought back to life, with a machine or with something. Well, what do they experience during that time when they are, kind of officially, physically dead or almost dead? What happens? Is it just nothing? Do they experience nothing? Like they're just in a deep, deep, deep sleep with no dreams, just no awareness? Certainly sometimes. But what's interesting is that many, many, many people, and we're talking about probably tens of thousands or more, I don't know the number, but the author collected a lot of interviews with hundreds and hundreds of people who had that experience. And when they were officially dead, they had very similar experiences, these hundreds and hundreds. And I think now, he wrote this book back in the 70s, I think now it's up to, thousands and thousands and thousands of interviews with people from all different cultures, countries, religious backgrounds, ages, that have had very, very, very similar experiences when dead or when almost dead. And that's what this book is about. What do these people say happens? What happens to them? What happened to them while they were dead? And what's interesting is that what they describe are experiences that match very closely with the major religious teachings of around the world, with many, I should say, of the religious teachings around the world. Now, these people don't stay dead. They only go, if you think of it, like they're on the path of death, right? The path of what comes after. But they can only go so far because they're always brought back, or else we wouldn't be able to talk to them. So it's an incomplete picture we're getting from them, but still very, very, very interesting. And these are called near-death experiences. Was it Safar Murad? How do you pronounce your name? Sorry, Safar Murad says, I'm sorry, no, it's Nasser. Near-death experiences. That's the official phrase. That's how mostly these are described. Near-death experiences. All right, so I'm just going to read. This is a big chapter. Chapter 2 is very long. We can't do all of it this time. I'm just going to do a kind of a short section of it today. We're going to break it into pieces. I might need 3 or 4 lessons because this is the main part of the book is chapter 2. In chapter 2, he describes the whole process of near-death experiences. So it's a lot to talk about. So we'll go slowly. This is a big topic, a very big topic. Okay, I'm going to read. I'll read about a page here, and then I'll come back and explain some vocabulary and explain what, the meaning. Okay, so chapter 2, the experience of dying. I'll change my screen to. Okay, chapter 2, the experience of dying. Despite the wide variation in circumstances surrounding close calls with death, it remains true there is a striking similarity among the accounts of the experiences themselves. Okay, I need to explain as I go because it's a long, fairly complicated sentence. Okay, so he's saying, what does this sentence mean? It means that there are a lot of similarities, right? People who have near-death experiences, that many of them have very, very similar things happen to them. But there also is variation. So this is what he's saying. So he's saying, the details of what happens can be quite different, but there are also some very big general experiences that are the same or very similar. Okay. And then he used the phrase close calls with death. A close call means kind of like almost. It's something that almost happens, right? A close call with death means coming very close to death, almost dying. In fact, similarities among reports are so great that one can easily pick out about 15 separate elements which recur again and again in the mass of narratives. Now, written English can be more difficult in terms of the vocabulary and the sentence structure. And that's what we're seeing here. Spoken English, often the challenge is the speed. But spoken English is often simpler, I would say, but faster. Spoken English. Okay, so let me go back this sentence now. Okay, so yes, there are some differences, but he's saying there are about 15 elements. So he's studying all these interviews with people who almost died. And he has found, not only him, actually many others have found, about 15 things, 15 experiences that recur. That means they repeat. Recur means repeat. Happen again. That recur, that repeat again and again and again. All right, stop spamming my comments, guys. Don't just keep putting the same comment again and again. All right, so 15 things, and that's what this chapter is about. What are the 15 things that are common? You've probably heard some of these. Some of these you'll see them in movies, so you won't be surprised, probably. I'm gonna read the next section, and this is kind of a common experience. This is not like just one person. This is an experience of like what happens when people die. This is kind of like all the different 15 parts. What often happens. I'd say this is the most important part of the book, right? This next section. Okay, a man is dying. As he reaches the point of greatest physical distress, meaning the most pain, he hears himself pronounced dead by his doctor. Okay, it means, so he's feeling the most pain, and suddenly he hears the doctor say, oh, he's dead. Talking about the man. He begins to hear an uncomfortable noise. So this is the first thing. He hears an uncomfortable noise, a loud ringing or buzzing. Buzzing is like bzzz, ringing is like a bell, right? So the first thing, he's dead. I mean, his heart stopped, brain stopped, however they're measuring it in the hospital. And what the first thing that happens, he hears some noise. Okay, at the same time, this is number 2, he feels himself moving very rapidly, very quickly, through a long, dark tunnel. And this is one you'll see in movies a lot, about death and someone dies. The tunnel, going through the tunnel. This is super common in near-death experiences when people die. This idea, like going through a tunnel. After this, suddenly he finds himself outside of his own physical body. So kind of going through the tunnel, there is kind of like we'll say the soul leaving the body. And now the person who is now dead feels themselves, they're outside their physical body, but they're still in the same environment. So, for example, maybe they're still in the emergency room at the hospital. And he sees his own body from a distance. Okay, so goes through the tunnel, now he's outside his own body and kind of looking down at his own body, can see the doctors, can hear the doctors and what they're saying, can see his own dead body now, but he's outside. He watches the resuscitation attempt. Resuscitation means to bring back to life, right? Maybe they're like, doing his heart, doing it with a machine with a heart, those paddles, whatever they're called. I always see it in the movies again. And sometimes the person watching the doctors do this to their body, they feel upset. And maybe confused. They don't quite realize they're dead yet, and they can be kind of upset by all this. But after a while, he collects himself, meaning he calms down, and he becomes more used to his odd condition. So being upset only lasts a short time. Then he kind of calms down and gets used to being outside the body, just being the soul or spirit, whatever word you want to use. He notices he still has a body. So there's some kind of body, but it's more like an energy. It's not like this, it's not flesh, not blood, but one that's very different, with very different powers, very different from the physical body. Soon other things happen. Others come to meet and help him. So this is the next thing that's very common. Sometimes they go through a tunnel again, and then they meet other people, like other souls, other spirits. He sees the spirits of relatives and friends who have already died. Okay, this is the next common thing that happens, that this dead person will meet other people, family members that have already died, or friends that died before them. Now, meeting them again in some kind of spiritual place, spiritual world. Okay, the next one. After this, or sometimes at the same time, a loving, warm spirit of a kind he never encountered, a being of light, appears before him. Okay, so this is very important. A being, a creature, of light, like very strong, powerful, pure light, is the next person they meet. Okay, now we'll get into later in the book. This is where different people who have come from different religions identify the being of light differently. Christians will often say this, that they thought the being of light was Jesus. Some think the being of light is God. Some might say it was, Krishna. And others identify it more like an angel. So they don't agree, but they do agree it's some kind of very higher spiritual, loving, kind being of light is how they describe it. Okay, the being of light asks a question. So this is the next experience. The being of light asks this person, the dead person, to evaluate his life. To evaluate means judge. So he has to judge his own life. Did he live a good life or a bad life? And the being helps them by showing him a panoramic, meaning very wide, instant playback of the major events of his life. Okay, so this is the next common element you'll see with people die, where it's they kind of review. It's called life review. They have a review of their life, right? They're dead now, so they kind of review all the major, like, important things that happened to them in their life, and then they have to kind of, they're kind of judging it. You know, oh, was I? So you see all the times you were mean and bad and terrible, and you know, that's no fun. That sounds terrible. And then hopefully you see the times you were kind and loving and wonderful, but you see it all, and then you kind of have to judge it or learn from it, like your own life. Okay, next, at some point, he, the dying person, finds himself approaching a barrier or a border, representing the limit between earthly life and the next life. Okay, so remember that these are near-death experiences, so these people always come back. So the next thing that happens is they come to like a border, meaning like almost like a wall, not a real wall, but they can't go farther, right? And they have the feeling, if I go farther, if I keep going, they'll be totally dead. They'll never be able to come back. So they come to this point and they have to come back. Or they want to come back. Yet he finds, okay, here, this is the next common thing that most of them say, most of these people say, finds he must go back to Earth. The time for his death has not yet come. Obviously, because they tell their story, so they come back. But this is interesting. At this point, he resists, for he is now taken up with his experiences in the afterlife. He does not want to return. He is overwhelmed by intense feelings of joy, love, and peace. This is not quite nice. So, in other words, maybe sometimes it's the being of light, or sometimes they just feel it. They need to go back. But they really don't want to go back because this wherever they are, this spirit, we call it spiritual realm. Yeah, you might call it heavenly realm. It's not quite heaven, I think, because it's, they can't go all the way. But they describe it as wonderful and beautiful and love and peace. They always describe the light, the being of light, the same way. Forgiving and loving, and even when they have to judge their life, these people, they always say, they judge. The being of light is being very kind and forgiving. It's the person that's really judging their own life. Okay, so so even though they really don't want to leave, they come back, either because they have to, sometimes they want to, maybe they're missing, they want to come back and help people, whatever. Okay, after he comes back to life, right? The doctors do something, boom, heart starts beating again. Later, so when he's out of the hospital, maybe, he tries to tell other people what happened, but he has trouble doing it. First, he can find no human words adequate, meaning good enough, to describe these unearthly episodes, unearthly experiences. I'm looking at the wrong camera. He finds that others scoff, so others laugh about it or say, that's nonsense. You were just on drugs. So he stops telling other people. So a lot of these people, they try to tell some other people, family or friends, and maybe they get bad reactions. And so they kind of just start being quiet about it. They don't want to share about it. Not always, but it's common. But even though they stay quiet, this experience affects his life, the person's life, profoundly, meaning powerfully, very deeply. Especially his views about death and its relation to life, so death and life. You find that these people usually lose their fear of death. It's one of the, not surprising that this would be a common experience, that they stop fearing death. I think all of them become religious at some level, right? Whether it's in a very formal way, with a very formal, specific religion, and sometimes they're a little more general and loose about it. But I think the ones I've seen a lot of interviews with these people on video, and they all believe in God, and yeah, it's quite powerful, and they all have very changed lives afterwards. All right, let me just see how much further we should go. I think we're just going to do a summary. We'll just do this summary. So I'm going to do one more page, and then we'll just talk about it. This is sort of the big picture. And then next, we'll start talking about each of these experiences individually, right? Like some of the more details of what we just heard. Because each of these, there are a lot of details. Okay, now, next paragraph, he says, the above story is not does not represent just one person's experience. So sometimes people skip some of these, right? Sometimes people only have some of these experiences and not all of them. He says, I introduced the story here only to give a preliminary, meaning introductory, a general idea of what a person who is dying may experience. Okay, so then he says, before we continue, let's discuss a few facts. Fact number 1. Even though there are a lot of similarities, no two stories are exactly the same. So that's not surprising, right? Each person experiences these things a little different. They might describe the tunnel in a different way. Some people describe a valley, a dark valley. Some a tunnel, right? So so you can see the general idea is very similar, but the details might be quite different. No one, he says, I have found no person who reports every one of these, but many have most of them. He says, there's not one element that always happens to everybody, but some of them happen to almost everybody. So it's just saying some of them are very, 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 very common, and maybe some of these things don't happen to everyone. I saw at least one interview with a guy who had a very scary experience. Maybe he was a bad dude. I don't know. Oh, the order might be a little different. Sometimes maybe the tunnel, right? I kind of said that before. Sometimes the tunnel might happen as they're leaving their body. Sometimes the tunnel might happen more after they leave the body and they go into, to meet other beings. Oh, and then there's a variation with how far they go. And this is not a surprise, right? So, because some people, they die, their heart stops, or for example, maybe just for a very quick, couple minutes, a minute or less, like very fast. So this experience is very short, although for them it may seem very long, but, looking at it outside their body, they're dead or nearly dead for a very short time. And then there's some other quite interesting experiences where, for different reasons, people drop into comas and they die, and for some reason maybe their brain is protected, like by very cold water, for example, where they're able to stay dead for much longer, and they kind of go farther. They go much deeper into the experience. They go farther, and they tend to have a lot more details, and it's those really long ones can be quite amazing. You get a lot of the same elements, but with very powerful details, and I've read a few and heard a few that are quite amazing for some of the ones where the people were dead quite a long time. Now, obviously, most people can't do that. If your heart stops too long, you get brain damage and you just die. But there are a few cases, and I think hypothermia, meaning extreme cold, is one of them, where like people, for example, drown in frozen water, right? So they die, but their brain, body, everything's kind of kept very, 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 very cold by the cold water. So they're able to stay dead for a longer time without brain damage. And there have been a few other, I don't remember the details of how, but these are very interesting. And then, of course, sometimes people die and they come back and they don't remember anything. He said that happens too sometimes. All right, I think we're going to stop there, and then we will get into... I think, let me see, how long have we gone? Let me just check the time before I decide. 30 minutes, that's enough time. All right, we'll stop there. A little bit short today, but I think then we can get into some more details next time. All right, let's get back and we can get into the discussion. If you have questions about any of this camera, right? Yes. If you have questions about any of the vocabulary I mentioned, please let me know. If you have comments about the book or questions, also, please let me know and we can discuss it. All right, first of all, I see Vladislav says, I've read the whole book. The author describes what people who have taken a suicide attempt see. Near-death experiences are terrible for them. Yeah, isn't that interesting? You're right, and I've read a few of those too. And this is where I was talking about how sometimes there have been a few I've read that sound horrible, and suicide's one of them. And it's so interesting because suicide is quite strongly. How do I want to say it? There in many religions. Many religions teach that suicide is a sin or is terrible, or don't do it, that it's horrible, and for different reasons. But it is quite interesting then that these near-death experiences, even people who are not religious at all, that often with the suicide attempt they have I would describe it as a kind of hellish, just horrible experience, a very frightening, terrible experience. So there seems to be something about suicide that is spiritually toxic, right? Don't kill yourself. All right. Ilana Khan says, I experienced twice in my life a strange event of seeing my physical body while I was sleeping. Interesting. It was not a dream. I was completely awake and aware. It was like observing myself and the room from the outside. Yeah, this is exactly what they're talking about, these near-death experiences, exactly that. What's the word for it? There's some specific word for it, and I can't remember it now. It'll pop into my head at some point. Anyway, this happens almost always, I would say, with near-death experiences, but there are some people who report these kind of things, like Ilana, that have this kind of experience when sleeping, or I guess there could be other situations as well. This of leaving your body and then seeing, which then, of course, the obvious question or thought after that becomes, well, how do we do that? If we're only our body, if we're only our physical body, how is that possible? Well, and the answer is that we're more than just our physical body. I think that's what these near-death experiences are also quite powerfully pointing to. At least that's one strong conclusion from these, among others. Okay, Lingualica says, this is a scary topic, but on the other hand, it excites people's minds and curiosity. Yeah, I find it the opposite of scary, but I'm curious why you would say scary. I guess thinking about death can be scary. I guess kind of see your point there. Man is so constructed, this is Lingualica continuing, that he wants to know his future, but once he finds out, he'll lose interest in life. That's an interesting question. That's an interesting point, isn't it? Astral projection is kind of one thing people call that, but there's a different word for it. Yeah. Anyway, I'm glad you brought that up, Lingualica, because you might think that, right? That these people they die. They have these amazing experiences. They come back with zero fear of death after that. In fact, I wouldn't say they're not looking forward to death, but this is what's interesting. They don't want to die. Because one thing, if you watch the interviews with them, or just read them, they come back and they're very strongly say when they come back that they don't want to die, they don't want to commit suicide, that they feel that this life, there's a purpose, whether learning or growth, or that they have a purpose here, and while they're here, they want to be here and accomplish that purpose. It's just that they're not afraid of what comes next either. so that there's no feeling that, oh, this life is useless now. Oh, I've seen that, so now this is nothing. There's a feeling that, in fact, that when they're here, right? Maybe it's to help their families and love, and there are many reasons, but that this life is not useless at all. And this is what they report. You know, you'll hear that again and again, because it's a common question. Interviewers will ask them that, and they all answer in a very similar way. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, Mohammed says suicide is a sin is Islam. It's a sin in Christianity, I believe. I don't know what the official. It's I think. I don't know if sin's quite the right word, but I think Sanatana Dharma and Buddhism would categorize it as pointless and foolish. Right, creating a ton of bad karma. You're just gonna. So, yeah, I think in pretty much all in those major religions that it's highly discouraged. Let's say. Oh, okay. So Vladislav says he has a cousin who had that similar experience, that out of body. That's an easy word for it. There's a specific word, but out of body experience. Vladislav says, my cousin recently told me about his experience. One night, he got up, but he saw his body at the bed. He didn't understand how it happened. He just laid back down into his body. So he had some experience where he's sleeping, and then he thinks he wakes up. He thinks he's just standing up, getting up normally. That's kind of how I picture this. But then he turns and he looks and he sees his own body and realizes it's like his soul or spirit looking back, and then he just went back into it. I've never had anything like that happen, but it's fascinating. Very interesting. We'll get a little deeper into this with the book, but this can be, I would say there's very strong evidence that this really happens to these people. And what's the evidence? They actually hear things and describe things sometimes that people are saying in another room, that it would be impossible, right? Their heart's stopped, and yet sometimes they come out of their body, they go into another room, and they hear a conversation like their, I don't know, their friends are having. And then when they come back to life, they can say it exactly, word for word, exactly what their friends were saying at the moment they died. So there's some really interesting stuff like that too, that quite powerful evidence. Okay, Juntao, you don't understand what I'm talking about, so bye-bye. And stick to the topic. Okay. Art Bialian says, in my opinion, death is a new start, like a new life. There's a good quote for it. End is the beginning, and the beginning is the end. Right. It's interesting. Yeah, I think that's oh, anyway, we'll get into that. I'll let the people who've had the experience, I'll let the experiences speak for themselves. I have not had a near-death experience myself, so I can't say. Susan Taleb says, death is a vague secret. No one can describe or explain it. Just forget about it and live your life. Well, that's obviously not true, because we have a whole book of people describing it. So, who experienced something. So, I would say that's, I mean, you don't have to think about it if you don't want to. But I think it's sort of, the Shakespeare, to be or not to be, what happens after death? For most people, that's a pretty important question. That not only would affect your entire way of looking at life and living life would be affected by your answer to that. So I think for most human beings, for all of recorded history, this is indeed a very important question. Okay, My Wallet, My Choice is the profile name. Says, when I was a child, I had a similar experience. While I was sleeping, there was a light. That little by little, this light became weak until it turned off completely. I thought I died. Interesting. Four Corners Music says they don't believe there's any life after death. We go to nil after our death. Well, you can see that would affect how you live life then. So everything you do is pointless. No, okay, fine. But, you know, I would say that this is, at the very least, interesting evidence worth thinking about, right, in this book. You don't have to believe it, right? There's no 100% proof, but it's direct observational evidence. So I would, I kind of give it a lot of, I'm trying to think of a simple word to use. I think I give it a lot of authority. Okay. Oh, here's Lisa. Lisa says, I think many are afraid of death because they're afraid of the unknown. Right? Yeah, I think you're right. But these experiences show we have nothing to fear. We can live our lives much more freely. That's a great way to describe it, because, Lisa, what you're describing is what a lot of these people say. They come back and they can live life more freely with less fear, right? Because this is exactly what you're saying. So many people live life in general with fear of death being the very big one. But plenty of other things people are afraid of that makes their lives very unhappy and limited. And so you can imagine if you remove that, what for most people is probably the biggest fear of all, death, that would have a big change, you know, that would change your life completely. Imagine if you had no fear. What would you do? Well, go do it. And so, yeah, Joseph says, as Jews, we believe this too. Yep, right. Sorry, yep. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Sanatana Dharma. Buddhism, yeah. So those are the major big ones, right? Currently. Yeah, like Naima. So here we have a Muslim confirming the same. It's written in the Quran, the real life is after death. Now that's a very interesting way to say it. The real life is after death. That's a powerful phrase. That's really good, because this is what the people say. I hope it's in this book. If it's not, I'll find a video interview or something to talk about this, because this is something very, very commonly said by near-death survivors, right? People who come back. This idea, because they all say something that it's hard for them to describe it, right? Because they're in a place, in a world, an experience that's very, very different than this one. So using words, it's very hard for them. That's the next thing we'll talk about in this book, is how difficult it is for them to describe. But one thing they all say, or almost all of them say, is that the other world, the spiritual world, the heavenly world, whatever you want to call it, was more real than this one. It felt more real than this one. What does that mean? It's hard to describe. They can't really say exactly what that means in words, but that phrase they use that phrase a lot. It was more real than this world. More real. And so that's why, Naima, when you say the Quran says the real life is after death, in other words, that life is more real. It's that phrase, then, that teaching from the Quran is, it's almost the exact words of what these people are saying. Very powerful. Very interesting, isn't it? Arpyalan asks another interesting question, which we won't get into this so much, this book, honestly. What do you think about hell and paradise? So heaven and hell. I haven't read the book. It's being mentioned in it. This book focuses mostly on on what you might call paradise or heaven or heavenly realms, right? The experiences all in this book are all very, very positive, and they all describe, like this, again, the being of light, love, forgiveness, these things. quite beautiful, more real. So the idea of a hell or a hellish realm or something like that, it's much less common. Now, why is it less common? That's is a question. Is it less common because it doesn't happen much? Or maybe is it less common because those people don't want to talk about it, right? Like you can imagine if you had some hellish, terrible experience, maybe you don't want to talk about it. It's not something you want to share. But there are a few suicides, and there's at least one other. This man had one that was, quite horrible. Well, it was horrible, but then he kind of, it ended actually quite well. Maybe we'll talk about it another time. It doesn't fit the book right now. So this book mostly is focused upon what you might call heaven or paradise or heavenly realms. That's the experience of the people interviewed in this book. Samim asked a question which I cannot answer, and probably none of us can answer. Why is everything hidden from our eyes in this life or in life after death? Well, that's a question that many have have thought about and tried to answer. Why? Maybe we know later. Maybe we find out. Maybe we don't. I don't know. Anyone who says they know for sure, I mean, I don't know. But I will say this, the people who come back feel there is a purpose. They're here sometimes they're not sure exactly what it is, but a general feeling that this life has meaning and purpose. We don't always understand how or why. Oh, Ilana says there's a nice documentary series on Netflix called Surviving Death. There's also a YouTube channel that I follow that you can just, I'm going to look it up. Just if you get on YouTube, you can search, near-death experiences, and you'll find a lot of interviews with people talking about their own experience. And those are very interesting to hear them directly from the people who died. And Lingualica says, why is the person kind of repeating the question, why, if life after death is real, why are they not in a hurry to leave the earth? Because this earthly life has some purpose of learning or growth or something. So, whatever. Okay. Tung Min says, most people are afraid of, most people are afraid of being dead, but for me, death is inevitable, cannot be avoided, obviously. We must accept it and push it away and live our life meaningfully. Indeed. Rommel Andoy says, death is beautiful, but it doesn't mean we commit suicide. Well, that's a nice poetic way to say it. Very nice. Okay, comments are coming fast suddenly. Okay, Richard, I'm having a hard time understanding. Miser, I'm not sure what this word is you just used. If it's in English, then it's one I don't know. Hussein says, certainly life after life is true. Today's science has found that human has no one which never gets destroyed. I'm not sure what you're talking about exactly. This is an interesting question. Vladislav always has interesting questions. If there were an anti-aging medicine which made you stay young forever, you could live forever, indefinitely, would you take such medicine? That's an interesting question. So, thinking about what we're learning in this book, Some of you may, and some people, whether how you feel about it, it's up to you. But would you want to live forever in this body, in this world, in this life? If you could. My answer would be no. Actually, I've thought about it. And my answer is no. I would not want to live forever. But it's an interesting question, isn't it? Brahim Sase says, "Hi, teacher. The world is not random at all." Agreed. The organization in the universe is a tangible proof of the existence of God. Death is a transition period to a long trip. Thanks for all. Well, that's very well said, and your English is impressive too. Interesting. But yeah, very well said. Deha Ali says, "Are you speaking about this topic from an atheist perspective or an Islamic perspective?" Well, not specifically either, but definitely not atheist. I don't think anyone... let me say this. These people, none of them come back as atheists. Some of them are atheists when this happens. But when they come back, they are changed. So none of them come back as atheists. So definitely not atheist. Now, if Islam is your religion, I would say religious. It's hard to avoid, right? We're not talking about any specific religion. We're talking here not about teachings. We're not talking about what a specific religion says about this. We're talking about people who died and came back. What was their experience? Some of them were, in this book, I think this book is mostly Americans. Some of them Christians, some not. But I have read other books where, Muslims have had this experience, Hindus have had this experience, all different countries, different ages. The ones where children have died and come back are quite interesting. That those can be very powerful, because especially the very young children, they come back with such detailed, descriptions that match so much of this. It's another quite powerful piece of evidence, I would say. So it's hard to avoid the general idea of religion when talking about this topic, when people are going and they're meeting a being of light that many of them describe as God or as an angel or as a, specific, what would the word be? Avatar, something like that. Elena Polly says, "Life on Earth is just a trip. We are just tourists here for a short period of time." Yep, that seems to be kind of... It's okay. We'll get into some of the details. We're still talking general. In the rest of the book, he has actual quotes. He'll have a paragraph or two paragraphs that is... what exactly did the person say, the person who died. So they're just, you get to hear their own words, which is, I find it very interesting. Very interesting. All right, let's see what my time is. 54. Okay, we'll do a couple more and then I'm going to go. Ravi Levi says, "All knowledge of life and death is written in the Bhagavad Gita." Indeed. Olga, it says, reminding us of the 365 challenge. I'm doing my 365 day. This is the English challenge. Thank you, AJ, for the advice. Awesome. I'll do another show about that too. Mine was for jiu-jitsu, and I'm still doing jiu-jitsu and having a great time with jiu-jitsu. Vladislav says, "There's a theory that we are sent to Earth as punishment for crimes we did over there in the spiritual world." This is it's called a penal colony. I'll teach you some English here. Penal meaning Penal. Penal meaning like punishment. So the idea that, right, that, like people say, why are we here? Right? And all kinds of ideas, but we don't have proof. 1 second, I'm getting a leg cramp. Oh, my leg. So penal, the idea that this is a penal colony, meaning like a place where people, like a punishment, like you did something bad in heaven or spiritual world, and so you're sent here for a life as kind of a punishment. Considering how tough life can be sometimes, it's I would say it's a possibility. It's not a crazy theory, right? It's an easy one to imagine. Other people will, other ideas are that we're here to learn. Like there's something about being in a physical body, and that there's we're here to learn something, right? And a lot of stuff says, why do we not remember our experiences before birth? Yeah, that's one I've thought about a lot. Yeah, like why exactly? Why not? Why do we not remember it? I don't know. Right? I think Christians say something like, we see through a glass darkly. Is that a Bible quote maybe? What does that mean? Like the glass is dark. It means we can't understand everything. We're very limited, right? In not only these spiritual religious matters, but even in just the physical world, right? We make mistakes all the time. It's easy to be tricked. Our brains, our eyes, our ears, everything is very limited, and it's often very hard to figure out the truth, especially very big, deep truths can be tough. We can often get a general idea, but then we start asking these detailed questions, and it becomes obvious that we don't really know. We have no idea. This is kind of Plato's idea of the cave, right? If you're familiar with that story, this idea that we're all like in a cave looking at shadows, and we're not even seeing the real world, that we don't really understand it, and that it's therefore very, very hard for us to figure things out in that state. And that, of course, that goes along with like Atanyake says, if you contact with talented Buddhist monks, they have lots of information. Yeah, indeed, and you will find that some monks, Buddhists, Sanatana Dharma too, that have, the guys that really, 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 really intense meditation, all day long, like they're in some mountain or cave or a forest or something, and they can often have experiences that are fairly similar to these near-death experiences. Right, or even monks that are they're chanting and praying, or fasting is another one where people or prophets or saints have fasted for very long times, 20 days, 30 days. Real fasting, no food and sometimes no water, and this can bring them to this sort of closer to those experiences as well. Very interesting. In fact, I would say, if you wanted to investigate like what happens after death, and of course there are religious teachings, but people who are not religious, if you tell them, well, the Bible says this, the Bhagavad Gita says this, the Quran says this, they don't care because they don't really believe those books. So I think it's better if you tell them, well, think more scientifically. So read about near-death experiences. That's real evidence. That's like, those are witnesses, right? People who died and came back and they had an experience. It doesn't mean it's 100% proven, right? But it's definitely evidence, right? In a court, if you have if you have a witness, somebody sees a crime, they come to the court and they say, I saw him and he killed the other person. That's evidence, right? It's called eyewitness. It's a witness. Well, that's what these people are. Witnesses to death and what happens after. And if it's just one person, maybe you believe them, maybe you don't. But when it's hundreds and hundreds and thousands and little children and old people and all different cultures and religions, and they're all very similar, that's pretty strong evidence, even someone who's not specifically religious. The second one would be, religious, different categories of religious people: prophets, monks, saints, avatars, etc. Avatars are a special class, but just regular people, even who through intense and very, 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 some might say extreme meditation, fasting, other experiences, fasting and meditation and prayer being the three big ones, will come back with the same realizations or similar experiences that match pretty well with the near-death experiences. And that's another kind of direct witness experience, right, that they are having. And the third, which I don't necessarily recommend, but the third type of direct experience would be certain psychedelic drugs, where DMT, probably the main one, where people will do that and have, although these can be quite different too, but sometimes people who do those those psychedelic drugs specifically, will have experiences that match, somewhat to what the saints and the prophets and the gurus are saying, and what the near-death experience people are saying. It's just another piece of, for me, it's just another piece of evidence. That's all. I wouldn't trust it completely, just that. But if you look at that and you look at the religious, the great religious saints and the near-death experiences, and you look at them all together and you add them all up together, even if you don't need to just believe a certain book, you can look at all of that and then you go, whoa, wow, that's a lot of evidence. Then read the Quran, or then read the Bible, then read the Bhagavad Gita, and you will read it in a very different way, right? It will it will come alive, I think. At least for me, it does. So these, I find these experiences very powerful, very interesting. Okay, and finally we'll end with Nikola Tesla. Wow, Nikola Tesla's in the chat. Welcome back. Okay, Nikola Tesla says, I'm not afraid of what comes after death. It can't be worse than this life. I really believe God is most merciful, but I'm scared of the death itself, the pain. Yeah, I agree. That part doesn't sound very enjoyable, does it? Now, we'll say this. Again, when you listen to these experiences, at least for the sudden deaths, the people will say that they kind of leave their body, like maybe the pain becomes intense, and then they just kind of leave the body, and then there's no pain anymore, even before the heart stops. You'll see this is a lot of the people say this. That gives you a little hope, maybe. But sometimes people have deaths that take months, right? Very long and a lot of pain, and I agree. It doesn't sound, I think most human beings would fear that, and no one wants that. I guess the good thing is that even if it lasts a while, it will be temporary, right? We just have to, if it comes to us that way, we just have to face it and deal with it. And hopefully it won't. Atanyake says, fasting is not mainly Buddhist, it's Hindu and also Islam. Buddhist is not hard, it's the middle path. I did meditation, discover ourselves. Fasting is ancient, very old. You guys know I love this topic of fasting. I won't go too far into fasting, but fasting, many Christian groups do it. I think a lot of Christian groups sadly have lost it or made it into something that's so weak that it's basically useless. But it used to be, much more serious. I think Islam still famously very serious about fasting, and as you said, Sanatana Dharma and Buddhism as well. So fasting is wonderful. All right, I think we're gonna end there. So very interesting, very interesting. I think just have an open mind and think about it. That's all. I'm not trying to, convince you. I think it's just a fascinating topic, and it's something that I think for most people this is a big question. I think it's quite interesting to look at the actual witnesses, the actual people who have experienced this in some way. And what do they have to say? And that's what this book's about. We'll continue with the book later, and I'll do some more Effortless English shows on other topics coming soon. Coming up this week, I'll do another show soon. Okay, lots of love to you all. As always, join my VIP program. Go read Carol's success story on my Gab that I read in the beginning of the show today, because it's really great. I hope it gives you some confidence about your English. You can do it. You can do it. You can succeed, and you can succeed at that very high level. You can do it too. Okay, go to effortlessenglishclub.com. Join my VIP program. Try it for $1. Lots of love to you. See you next time. Bye for now.